Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all tech topics that are smart home automation, security, and console gaming related. Today is Tuesday, June 1st, 2021, our post-Memorial Day podcast. I hope all of you had an enjoyable holiday weekend. Lots and lots of interesting consumer tech topics to talk about despite the holiday. So without any further ado, let me bring on three journalists many of you know quite well, the three troubadours of tech reporting, Rob Pegoraro, who writes for USA Today, Fast Company, and Wirecutter. John Quain, who happens to be in a car driving around Vermont. He'll provide us with more details on what location. He's in a parking lot somewhere in Vermont. John writes is a frequent contributor for the New York Times and Digital Trends. And Stewart Wolpin, who opines for Twice and Laptop Magazine and happens to be my favorite baseball historian. Stewart, I'm forewarning you, no comments about the Yankees and their losing streak. You know, he actually did submit that as a topic you wanted to talk about, but my producer rejected that. So how are you doing? How was your weekend? Don't answer.
Spent a lot of time indoors thanks to crummy. But did get out for a bike ride yesterday and got to see a little bit of Arlington Cemetery, since that is in my neighborhood. A perk of living in the nation, in and around the nation's capital.
Right. Rob, I don't want to talk about this because this topic grosses me out, but do you see a lot of these bugs that are all over?
Yes, the cicadas. You're lucky I don't have the window open. Otherwise, you would hear this sort of extraterrestrial racket. We are now a good 2 weeks into our occupation by the cicadas, which basically is every 17 years, these bugs emerge by the billions, and their whole evolutionary strategy is to emerge in such number predators get an upset tummy from eating too many bugs, which allows them to then get on with making little baby cicadas that will then emerge from the ground in 2038. You have been warned.
Well, I have to tell you, Rob Walt Mossberg, who I think all of you know, is obsessed with the topic. All he does is he posts something negative about the Yankees, which he does quite frequently, and he'll do something about he's got lots and lots of images he likes to post about the cicadas, and like I said last week, Rob, in all deference to the people who live in the District of Columbia, I can't think of a better place for insects to breed, but that's another podcast. Anyway, we've got lots to talk about here. Let's chat. Yeah. Let's talk about the first topic. And this is your topic, John, but JBS, one of the largest meat suppliers in the U.S., Canada, and Australia, gets hacked, and that, if you remember, who was the guy that wrote The Muckraker during the 20s? Was it Sinclair Lewis?
Sinclair Lewis, yes.
I pulled that one right out of left field. Do you consider yourself the Sinclair Lewis to kind of expose this topic that we have?
Yes. It also bothered me because I spent part of the weekend writing about, computer security and PCI compliance, which is the standard that was imposed or that they formed in 2006 for credit cards because so much money was being lost in credit card fraud. And the card brands are on the hook for that money. Well, we already had the gas pipeline hacked and shut down for half of the eastern seaboard supply almost. And now the food supply, even if you're a vegan, you got to know that this is kind of a problem because this company supplies the pork and beef for a large percentage of the United States, has facilities in Canada and Australia, as you said. And they're not saying exactly what happened, which is another problem with this. Are their facilities shut down? They're not saying.
And this is very, very scary, especially after the pipeline incident a couple of weeks ago, which we're now just coming out of after they paid the $5 million ransom in Bitcoin. It begs the question, and I'd love to get Stewart's opinion and Rob's opinion on this. Are the feds going to have to intervene at some point? And I think the answer is probably yes, in terms of mandating, minimum legislation that, requires, if you're being part of the infrastructure, whether it's food, energy, healthcare, it would be a very, very comprehensively long list. does the government have to come in and say, you know what, you have to have standards in terms of what your cybersecurity looks like? Not to say that that would not have been, circumvented by these hackers, but Stewart, what's your thoughts on that angle?
Well, they've already done that. They did that, I think, last week or the week before for the pipeline. For the first time, Homeland Security did impose some sort of security regulations on at least a minimum set. Now, I think on the meat business, I believe that this was primarily in Australia. Now, they haven't said whether or not this has impacted anything outside of Australia. And Australia does export a lot of the meat that they do there, but I don't think it's hit anything in the U.S. I haven't heard that it's hit anything in the U.S. But on a much broader scale, two things to understand. One, the crooks are always going to be ahead of these companies. That's been the truth forever. I've spoken to a half a dozen security people, and they all say the same thing, that it is almost a total reactive situation where the crooks come up with something and then you have to fix something. So even if the government does come in and impose a certain amount of base level regulation, as you said, the evildoers are always going to find a way to get out of it. Now, from what I understand, JBS did have a backup system that the pipeline people did not have. So from what I understand, that the JBS will be able to correct the issue far faster because they maintain a hardy backup system. So what those baseline sort of protections that the government is going to impose, as we well know, government and technology don't exactly get along either. So the government might impose something, but who even knows that that's going to be anywhere near effective? So this is going to just get a lot worse before it gets better.
No, it's going to get a lot messier. And to your point, Stewart, I'm always concerned about, the government has been historically way behind the curveball on technology and implementing the right standards. And, can you, not to get into a long discussion about this, but I don't have a lot of faith because whatever they impose, the bad guys will find a way to get around it, and you get into this perpetual cycle of, well, what have you solved? But of course,
yes and no. These aren't very sophisticated attacks. Remember that these are not really sophisticated users of this hacking software, and it's become a modular kind of business. I think what you need to do is look at what happened with credit cards. So what happened with credit cards was the companies themselves were responsible for all that fraud. I was hacked myself, and somebody charged $75,000 worth of material on my card. Wow. And I didn't pay anything, right? And so the credit card companies went, wait, this is not good. The law was that they were responsible for it. So that's where you put that legislation in, and you force them to do something about it. And they did. They now have this PCI compliance. If you work with any credit card company, store any customer information, transmit any customer information, it has to be encrypted. It has to be secure. It has to meet all these very, very, very specific technical requirements. And that's all enforced by Amex, Discover, Visa. And if you don't do it, they fine you, right? Even as a merchant, you get fined, or they won't let you handle their cards anymore. So you need to do something like that. If you make these companies financially responsible for it, if that company started paying so much money every hour that they were offline, I think they'd fix it pretty quickly.
Well, but John, the only thing I would respond to in that argument is that when you say things, when the argument is, well, the consumer in your situation, you didn't pay for that error. Believe me, someone's going to pay for it. If it happens enough, you would think the company would respond with, "Hey, we don't want to pay these kind of settlements to get to keep the consumer, in this case, a business, kind of protected from that activity." But someone pays for it. It's not. There's no free lunch, unless of course,
But that's why they installed these standards. That's why they came up with these technical standards themselves, because they were fed up with paying for it. And that's what you just have to do with these other companies. There's only so much you can pass along to the consumer, right? And they want to make money, make them pay.
Well, I want to get Sinclair Lewis Jr.'s opinion into this. So, Rob, please. Rob, that's a compliment, by the way. I have great respect for Sinclair Lewis.
So yeah, basically what JQ said, you need to find some way. The problem we've had with data breaches in the past, if I assume all of us had the privilege of getting Equifaxed, right? Did Equifax have any real amount of money? Did they suffer any pain? Have we gotten compensated for it? No. And it's different in the realm of financial security, where because the credit card issuer has to make good on fraud, it is in their direct and obvious financial interest to crack down on it. And right now we don't have that situation, certainly not with data breaches and identity theft. And here, I don't know, cases like ransomware are sort of harder to figure out because, yes, obviously it should be in your interest as a company to not have your systems taken offline by some 2-bit ransom operator hunched over a keyboard in St. Petersburg, Russia. But it keeps happening. And then you have this case where companies like Colonial Pipeline was not exactly a model of transparency.
Yes.
And saying, hey, this happened and here's how it happens. So you can make these changes so it won't happen to you, which is the opposite. The feds have been able to have an effective safety regulation regime in transportation because airlines can't be like, yes, the 737 augured into a cornfield, but we're not going to talk about how that happened right now. You don't get away with that.
Right.
Yeah, this is, I think, John, you said it, or Stewart, you said it. This is going to be, unfortunately, a song and dance we're going to hear repeatedly for the remainder of the year, if not going into next year, because this is very problematic.
And of course, the bigger problem is that this is part of a bigger problem, which is the Russian basis of this could very well be state sponsored, which adds a whole new dimension to the issue. And the problem with a lot of the issues that we're going to continue to confront as they begin to expand is it's going to not only a technical issue, but a diplomatic issue. And not only identifying who the culprits are, but whether or not this is state sponsored enough, which enlarges the entire issue.
Maybe not state sponsored, but certainly state tolerated. That's
correct. State tolerated, right. Exactly.
Right. No,
I had a bunch of panels about this at the RSA security conference 2 weeks ago. And one point, everyone was mad and nobody had a great solution because, as tempting as it is, we probably should not, in fact, drone strike the guy hunched over a keyboard in St. Petersburg. Bad things could happen if we do that. So what do you do? I don't know. And that's why I'm glad I don't have to make policy and solve this problem for everyone.
There's an upcoming summit between two big leaders, one in Russia and one over here. And you'd like to think that this topic is going to come up. And, again, I wouldn't go so far to say it's state sponsored, and I think you were careful, Rob, pointing that out. But certainly there is a kind of a look the other way, I think, attitude that at the end of the day, it's just as dangerous, and maybe it's the Russian version of plausible deniability. Who knows? But certainly that's a big topic that's going to come up. Let's hit our second topic here, and that is the ongoing Roku, Google, YouTube. And it's been ongoing. It just says, put the gloves on, and this has been going on for some time. And this is a topic, Stuart, you wanted to tee up, but my initial thoughts on this. This is one of the reasons why consumers, they've been embracing cord cutting in big ways over the last several years. I mean, all the research shows that. But if you're depending on YouTube, for daily content, and there's a lot of people that are. And if you use either a Roku standalone device or increasingly the Roku has a very impressive line of partners in the TV business like TCL, it becomes very problematic. I mean, the last thing you want to find out is, guess what, I can't get to YouTube because guess what, they're having a bit of a spat. But Stuart, let's get to your thoughts on this because this is an important topic and it's something that keeps coming up over and over again, not just specific to YouTube, but in that whole cord cutting equation where people find out, hey, I signed up for a service and someone has a spat and all of a sudden I can't get to the content. So let's talk a little bit about that and get your view.
Well, I think a lot of this is a balance of power issue. In addition to it, both sides are making all sorts of claims that each one of the other ones is denying. Roku is claiming that Google is trying to force Roku to include technology such as chips that support AV1, which is a royalty-free codec, that would boost the price of the Roku streamers, that would be on par to the Google streamers, and Roku is accusing Google of all sorts of things. I think a lot of it really, this reminds me so much of the cable carriage issues, where cable system and a program provider, a channel wants more money for their channel to be on cable system. This is simply an extension of that fight, only much more technical involved. But a lot of it is a balance of power issue. And I think what Roku is feeling like a little bit of a David and Goliath, where Google can get along without having YouTube TV on Roku. But I don't know that Roku can survive without YouTube TV being on it. I mean, that's going to cut off a lot of people. So right now, if the last I heard was that Google has Roku has taken off the Roku TV app, the YouTube TV app. Yes. And so what Google has done is taken the YouTube TV link and put it into the YouTube app, which is still on Roku. And now Roku is screaming about that. So nobody wins. It's one of those everybody wins, nobody wins, everybody loses.
Exactly. And the one thing I would add to what you were saying, Stewart, is, and again, this is a bit esoteric, but when you go out and buy a TCL TV and it's got Roku functionality built into it, and I love my TCL TV. I think it's one of the best TVs on the market, frankly, especially for the dollar. Yep. One of the gripes, not gripes, but one of the risks you play when you buy a smart TV with this built into it, if all of a sudden a company like Google comes along and says, "Guess what, Roku? We want a higher performance codec in the TV," and guess what? Now you've got millions of TVs out there that are not upgradable by definition. And guess what? Guess you may be out of luck. And even though you have a smart TV, you got to upgrade it. And with an external product, and that's very messy. So this is
well. Plus the other issue is, of course, is that Google is selling its own TV platform,
right?
Android TV. So there's that piece that's added into this.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why the word antitrust really comes to fore here. You're crossing markets and you're using your dominance in one market to dominate another market. And that's classic antitrust. I mean, this is a serious problem that we have as consumers. You can't have the provider suddenly dictating to the quintessential over the top. We started the whole business, Roku, right? And that seems like a problem. I don't think YouTube TV is a big deal, though. I mean, I don't watch it. If it was Hulu, if it was something like Netflix, then that would be a serious issue. But I don't think YouTube TV is making enough of an inroad, which is probably part of their problem. But there's still Spectrum is a good example, too, where they're still bickering about it. I've got it on some of my devices because it's still loaded there. And they come on and say, "Please do not delete Spectrum, or you'll never get it back." Sort of. So, but they're still bickering too.
Rob, your 2 cents.
Yeah. It's customers should not be in this position. Customers should not have to think like venture capitalists and game out the possible balance of power implications as if buying a TV has become this version of the board game Risk, where you need to decide. Roku is that they're in Kamchatka. They're well positioned to go on. No one has time for that nonsense. And we already had enough of it. The whole reason to cut the cord and go to streaming is to get out of these stupid retransmission fights that cable operators always get into with TV networks.
Yes.
Like every year with clockwork regularity.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, the battles between Dish Networks and Fox and other providers, it becomes very problematic. And, the days of, say what you will, but you go back 25 years, when cable was the platform, you rarely had that problem. But over the last 15 years, I'll call it the last 10 years, it's been very problematic. And I think that if you're going to make a decision to cut the cord, and millions of people are, this is one of the ongoing frustration levels that say, you know what, I wish I pined for the old days when I didn't have that problem. Where guess what? I turned the TV on. I cannot. Could you imagine back in 1985? Oh, I turned my TV on and I can't get the ABC News in New York channel. If it's still Channel 7, is it Channel 7?
Yes, Channel 7.
Yeah.
My memory's still good. So anyway, very, very problematic, and we'll see how that kind of pans out. Rob, this is your fun topic. Google Photos. They now have the audacity. They want to charge more now if you go above the 15 gigabyte storage limit. So let's talk a bit about the interesting take. Well, I'm sure it won't be interesting. I'm sure it'll be very, very forceful on your view on what Google's up to.
So a couple of thoughts I have. Number one, I don't mind per se that they're charging for storage. I did look through my notes from Google I/O, I think 2015, when they announced Google Photos, and they said, that this is not an ad-driven product. We want you to be comfortable storing your photos here forever. They didn't actually say, we'll give it to you free forever. And the rate they're talking about, I think 100 gigs is $1.99 a month, but don't pay that. Pay the $19.99 annual rate. That's not crazy, and it's certainly in line with what you pay for added storage elsewhere, whether it's Microsoft OneDrive, Apple's iCloud. If you want to get a Flickr Pro account, that's considerably more, although you get other features with it. That's a separate kind of app and social network. On the other hand, the way Google's implemented it, the tools they've given you, if you go to the website, not the Google Photos app you might have in your iPhone or Android phone, you'll have options. It'll offer to show you blurry pictures, but their automated filter for that is not that good. And I would have thought Google would be good at that. What you really want is, for the Google cloud brain to tell you, so, you took 10 pictures of the smartphone at this trade show. Remember going to trade shows, guys? None of them suck. Keep this one. Get rid of the others. And make you a better photographer in that way. And it doesn't do that. It's not well set up to show duplicate photos. And the other thing I've realized, though, in looking at this, so much of the quota I have a 17 gig quota, which I think I remember at some point Google offered 2 gigs of extra storage if you took some cybersecurity quiz. A lot of it is my Gmail. And so basically this is Groupon's fault because of all the stupid messages they've sent me over the last 10 years, eating up my Gmail storage. Storage from photos taken on my phone is as big of a problem as just plain old Gmail.
Right. It sounds expensive too. I mean, aren't they, I think I just copied 8 terabytes over to back up, and that 8 terabyte drive was like $100. So to start charging me a few dollars every month for a few gigabytes seems pretty exorbitant. And then to serve ads on top of it, and then to data mine every photo I have and say, oh, look at what JQ's doing, and look, he likes electric bicycles, and it just seems like too much.
They're actually very direct at I/O, their conference 2 weeks ago, I guess.
Yeah.
We don't use data you store with us for advertising purposes. They said that very directly. And in this case, since they are actually charging for storage space, that is a known business model. I would actually rather have them do that than to say, we'll keep Google Photos free, but we'll monetize the fact that you have lots of pictures of electric bikes or, the New York Mets or whatever, and then use that to add that. Realistically, they can get that info from other places. So I would just assume that they keep this separate from that. And it's $20 a year, but this is also storage that's available anywhere you have an internet connection. It's backed up. They do good security. I don't think the value proposition is unreasonable. I do think they can improve on the tools they give you to manage the photos you have.
Stewart, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they announced this in November, so I'm not going to say this is old news, but there's been plenty of time for the market to absorb all this. They announced, like I said, in November, that that June 1st was the day, number one. Number two, as far as I understand, what they're going to be charging for is only for new content. That, in other words, if you already have stuff stored there, they're not going to, in other words, if you already have, 56 gigabytes of photos on there, they're not going to start charging you, or 120 gigabytes, I should say. They're not going to start charging for that. I believe, if I understand the pricing structure, is that people who already have a Google Drive account or any Google storage account, is that starting today, they will start charging you once you get past that for the new 100 gigabyte of data. So I don't think that that's, as Rob says, I don't think that's unreasonable. Paying for storage, I already pay Apple a couple of bucks a month for whatever it is. So I don't have to worry about my phone filling up with videos and pictures. So I always believed that somebody was going to start charging this, because it makes a perfect amount of sense. It's certainly a business model that even the least techie person can understand. We're giving you something to hold on to us. You pay us to hold on to it. I mean, that's easily understood, and I don't see how anybody would protest that. Now, whether or not the tools to get at your pictures, I've never found Google's tools to be that comfortable, number one. And two, Google says that they're not going to use it. Quite frankly, I trust them as far as I could throw the big mo.
Right.
But $1.99 for anything that current customers use that they add on here, it's hard for me to get upset about this.
Yeah, I mean, I want to move to our last topic because we only have a few minutes left here, but I'm very, very skeptical of it's not so much the cost issue, like you, Stewart, stated. I'm just concerned about, Google having access to all my photos, and I just don't believe them. I think they find ways of circumventing things, and they just, they justify it after the fact. I saw a piece, and I didn't read it very heavily, but there was a story over the weekend that talked about the fact that Google is constantly looking at ways to publicly make statements that they protect people's privacy, but behind the scenes, they're always looking at ways, algorithms that can circumvent. They can, with a straight face, say, well, yeah, we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this. But at the same time, they're able to get around it and with a straight face say, oh, yeah, we don't do that. But in fact, they are doing that. So so I don't know. I struggle with it. Not to say that Apple can't do that or others can't do it, but as much as Apple's starting to strain credulity with me because of their statements last week at the trial that they don't know how much money that their app store makes. That kind of just still blows. That's a different conversation, but that still blows me away. But call me a skeptic when it comes to
businessmen and politicians.
Yes. Yeah. Last thing we got to talk about, because it's coming up in about a week or so, is Apple's WWDC 2021, the big worldwide developer forum. Just very quickly, John, any expectations you might have? I just wrote a story about it on Forbes, talking about whether they're going to answer the big question about merging Mac OS and iOS. That seems to be the question that perennially comes up. There'll be other obviously interesting things that will come out of it, but have you given it any thought about what you will come out of it, you think?
I wonder if they'll match more of the things that Google was doing with Fitbit and healthcare issues and integrating that even more. I mean, that's certainly a hot area and lots of room for development and lots of room for improvement and a lot of research going on in that area right now. I would expect that they might make some announcements in that area. But you're right. If they merge those two, everybody's wanted that to happen, but I don't think we're going to hear that this time around.
They've publicly made statements that they will never do that, although they've taken baby steps,
right.
They give you the feeling that they might do that. I think there'll be some new announcements around Apple Silicon. You probably will see an M2 or talk about that, because they really haven't addressed the pro market yet. And certainly an M2 with more cores and more addressable memory, et cetera, that would be a logical thing for them to address. Stewart, you're nodding your head. What do you think that?
Yeah, I fully expect the second gen M silicon to be announced or at least hinted at, because they, as you're right, I think they haven't done pro stuff, a lot of pro stuff. For instance, I'm still waiting eagerly for the next generation 15 or 16 inch MacBook Pro, which I need desperately. I think there'll be a next generation Mac Mini, because I think that there were a lot of, I won't say a lot of complaints. There were some itchings from some of the pro side on some of the limitations. For instance, on the Mac Mini, you can only put into 16 gig of RAM, which is, I've got 32 on my desktop. Why would I want to limit myself to 16 gigabyte? Obviously, you'll see, I think, the next generation OS, either a new version of Big Sur or something along that line, iOS 15. The other thing I think that, I don't know that I'm hoping for, but I'm guessing that they're going to do, just based upon what they did with the iPad Pro, is I think Lightning might be finally going away. Then I think that along with the 120 hertz screen that we're supposed to be seeing on the next version of the iPhone 13 or whatever they're going to call it, maybe they'll skip 13 and go right to 14, like in an elevator. But I think I'm sort of half hoping that Apple moves completely to C, USB-C, on the next generation. Now, whether or not they will announce such a thing at WWDC, or whether or not that will wait for the new iPhone, or whether or not they add it only to the Pro side and keep the Lightning jack on the lower end model, I don't know. But I think we are slowly but surely creeping up to USB-C becoming a universal standard everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Rob?
I hope you're right with that, because I hate the Lightning cable. The fact every other portable device I own recharges via USB-C. And now I'm thinking that Apple might actually make this move. Why? Because I just bought a couple of stupid Lightning cables. By the way, when your Lightning cable inevitably frays, don't buy it from Apple. Anker makes a much sturdier Lightning cable that does not fray if you look at it the wrong way, and is a little cheaper than Apple's.
Right.
But honestly, I don't expect to see any news about that at WW, as Apple regulars refer to WWDC. I think pro hardware like a Mac Mini, a MacBook Pro laptop, maybe a higher end iMac. At some point, they got to replace the Mac Pro, but maybe they need to redesign the $5,000 set of wheels that come with the old one first.
Well, it's interesting. Fixing some of those limitations that Stewart talked about, and I know this because I've had the new Mac Mini, the M1 version, for about 6 months. My chief gripe is not so much the memory, because the Apple people would tell you, by the way, the M1 has a unique memory architecture that allows you to overcome the 16 gigabit limitation that, our systems don't need 32 or 64 gigabytes of memory because it's much more efficient. The jury's a bit out on that, but that's the Apple spin on that. But the big issue is the limitation on ports, and that's been the big frustration. You only have 2 USB-C ports.
Right.
Thunderbolt, I should say. They'll probably address that, because, I'm looking at my Mac Mini right now. It's like an octopus. I've got all kinds of dongles and cables off of it. And I do think that they're going to have to address the professional market, both at the iMac level and at the Mac Mini level, because there is an audience that just wants to buy a standalone desktop, and that's been their solution. But it will be interesting to see. There's always full of surprises. So, guys, listen, thank you for your time as always. Hopefully, the next time I talk to you, Stewart, the Yankees will be on a winning streak. Hope springs eternal. But everybody, thanks to the More Insights and Strategy audience. Thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please subscribe to the Smart Tech Check podcast on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week.